Hello! The tallest average humans in the entire fossil record didn't live today. They lived during the Ice Age. Early Homo sapiens averaged around 177 centimeters, and plenty of modern countries only caught back up to that number in the last 100 years. For most of the long stretch in between, our ancestors were, on average, shorter than the foragers who came long before them. The story you were handed, that we've just kept getting taller as we got smarter and richer, turns out to be, at best, the last chapter of a much weirder book. Today we're going to read the rest of it, bone by bone, and carefully, because almost everything you picture when you hear the word caveman is about to get shorter, taller, and stranger than you expect. Let's start with the picture in your head, because we all have the same one, and almost none of us chose it. Say the word caveman, and up it comes. Short, stooped, knuckles hovering near the ground, squinting up at you from somewhere around your shoulder. Behind him, there's an unspoken graph, a tidy little ramp where every species is a bit taller and a bit straighter than the last, climbing smoothly up toward us. The tall, clever, finished product at the top. It's a comforting image because it tells a comforting story. Progress. Onward and upward. We got smarter, so obviously we got bigger, healthier, better, height as a kind of scoreboard for the whole species, with the present day winning by default. Here's the trouble. When you stop imagining and start measuring, when you actually pull the bones out of the ground and run the numbers, that smooth ramp doesn't exist. What you get instead looks less like a staircase and more like a roller coaster. Height holds roughly steady for 2 million years, spikes hard, crashes, and limps back up. And the single tallest point on that whole ride is nowhere near the present. To see why, we have to start with the most slandered body in human history, Neanderthals. If anyone is the face of short, hunched, and primitive, it's them. So let's actually measure one. You can't put a tape to a being that died 40,000 years ago, so here's how it works. You recover the long bones, the femur, the tibia, the big load-bearing ones, measure them precisely, and run them through regression formulas that link bone length to standing height. It's an estimate, and I want to be honest about that word the whole way through this video, because stature is always calculated, never measured, when the person in question is a fossil. Do that across the Neanderthal record, including some of the beautifully complete skeletons, and the average male comes out around 165 centimeters. Sit with that for a second. That's not a dwarf. That's squarely in the medium to above medium range for humans, right about level with the average pre-industrial European farmer, the kind of person we never picture as a stooped brute at all. So where did the hunched little caveman even come from? Largely from one mistake. Over a century ago, an early reconstruction of a Neanderthal skeleton presented it as bent, slouching, and ape-like, except that particular individual happened to be an old man riddled with arthritis. They built the public image of an entire species off one arthritic skeleton, posed wrong, and that cartoon has been squinting up at us from textbooks ever since. The real Neanderthal wasn't short. He was about your height and built like he could deadlift your car, thick bones, a barrel chest, dense muscle, packed onto a cold-adapted frame. Height was never their headline. Power was. And keeping their height straight matters, because it's the baseline for the actual surprise, which isn't them. It's us. The genuinely startling number doesn't belong to Neanderthals. It belongs to the earliest versions of our own species. Researchers did something clean and clever here. They took complete long bones from 3 different points on the family tree and ran them all through the same height formulas, so the comparison would actually be fair. Older Homo heidelbergensis, from a famous pit of bones in Spain, averaged about 163.5 centimeters. The Neanderthals, around 160.5. And then early Homo sapiens, bones from caves in what's now Israel, well over 100,000 years old, came out at roughly 177 centimeters. Let that land, because it's the spine of this whole video. For something like 2 million years, from early Homo all the way through the Neanderthals, average height barely moved. It just sat there, hovering in the low 160s, generation after generation after generation. And then our species shows up and the line jumps. more than 15 centimeters, half a foot, practically overnight by the standards of the timescales we're talking about. These were not small, struggling proto-people inching toward greatness. The early members of our own species were tall. Tall by their era's standards. Tall by the standards of most of the people who would come after them. Tall enough that if one walked past you on the street, you would not think ancient. You'd think, that's a big guy. Now the honest footnote. Because there always is one. We don't actually know why they were so tall. Genetics. A rich and varied diet. Climate, sexual selection, they're all on the table. And the sample of early sapiens bones is small, so nobody gets to be smug about the cause. What's solid is the pattern itself. Flat for 2 million years, then a spike. The real question is what happens next, because the line does not keep climbing. What happens next is the part that should genuinely bother you, because we usually file it under humanity's single greatest triumph. Farming. You've heard agriculture sold as the moment everything got better? Settle down, grow your food, build civilization, thrive. So you'd expect the height line to climb right alongside all that progress. It does the opposite. It falls. Pull together the bioarchaeology, dozens of studies. Across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, tracking populations as they switched from foraging to farming, and the same thing keeps happening, site after site after site. As people trade the wild, varied forager diet for a narrow one built on a couple of starchy crops, their skeletons get shorter. Their teeth get worse. The markers of childhood stress pile up in the bone. The first farmers, by and large, were sicker and smaller than the hunter-gatherers they descended from. Think about what that actually means. You can grow far more calories per acre with farming. That's why it won. That's why it spread, and eventually fed billions. But more calories is not the same as better nourishment, and a field of one crop is a feast that's always one bad harvest from a famine. The forager ate 100 different things. The farmer ate mostly wheat, or mostly rice, or mostly corn, and their bones recorded the downgrade, and you can sometimes watch it happen in a single place across time. Dig down through the layers at a site where foragers gave way to farmers, and the skeletons in the upper, farming layers are often the shorter ones, same region, more or less the same bloodlines, just a few thousand years, and one enormous economic change apart. The ancestors who chased and gathered their food stood taller than the descendants who grew it. That's not a metaphor. That's stratigraphy. I'll keep it honest. It wasn't a clean disaster everywhere. In the foundational survey of these populations, a couple of them didn't show the drop, and some of the changes in bone strength track how much people were moving around as much as what they were eating. But the overall direction is hard to argue with. We invented the thing we call the foundation of civilization. And one of the first things it did was make us shorter. Height, it turns out, isn't a scoreboard for progress. Here, it's closer to a scoreboard for what we gave up to get it. So let me make this physical, because centimeters on a chart are easy to skim past. Let me put you in the room. Imagine you could stand next to one of them. An upper Paleolithic hunter, 30,000 years old, alive again for just a moment in the cold light of Ice Age Europe. You've braced yourself for the cartoon. The squat little brute. Instead, you're looking him level in the eyes, maybe tilting your chin up a touch. He's wrapped in work hide, stitched against a cold you'd struggle to survive a night in, and he's built thicker than you, not gym thick, work thick, the density of a body that has never once had an easy day. By the averages we just walked through, he may well stand taller than the farmers who'll work that same valley 10,000 years after him. And here's the thing I want you to really feel about his height. And about yours. It isn't just a number. It's a record. The reason one person ends up tall and another short is written mostly in childhood, in how much food was reliably there and how much of a growing body's energy got burned, fighting off infection instead of building bone. A well-fed, low-disease childhood spends itself growing upward. A hungry, sick one doesn't get the chance. So an adult's final height is, in a quiet way, a diary of their first decade, a record of how hard or easy it simply was to be a kid. Which means that tall Ice Age hunter is telling you something just by standing there. His height is evidence of a childhood, with enough wild meat enough plants, enough space between hungry seasons. And the shorter farmer, who comes later, is telling you the opposite story in exactly the same silent language. We can't know how either of them felt about being tall or short. People didn't leave us their feelings, only their femurs. But the bones keep the score, whether anyone meant them to or not. While we've got the tape measure out, there's one more myth worth knocking down. Because when people picture the ancient world, they don't just picture short men. They picture a towering hunter looming over a tiny, delicate woman beside him. But the height gap between human men and women is, by the standards of the animal kingdom, surprisingly small, somewhere around 7% on average. Line up 100 ancient couples, and yes, the men trend taller. But it's a modest difference, not the dramatic mismatch we imagine. And as far as we can tell from the bones, Neanderthals weren't wildly different on this front either, though I'll flag honestly that researchers argue about exactly how their male-female size gap compared to ours. Some find it basically the same as modern humans, others find them a touch more dimorphic. It's an open question, not a closed one. Here's the part that actually matters, though. The big difference between the sexes was never really height. It was composition, muscle, and fat. The gap in lean muscle mass between men and women runs far larger than the gap in stature, on the order of tens of percent. So the real physical difference in that ancient couple wasn't that he loomed over her. It's that, pound for pound, their bodies were built to do somewhat different things, and our eye jumps straight to height only because height is the thing you can see across a clearing. The tape measure says the dramatic part of the story was happening under the skin, not in how far off the ground anyone's eyes were. Now I have to slow down and show you where this science actually gets hard, because if I just keep handing you confident numbers, I'm doing the same thing the old textbooks did with that arthritic Neanderthal. And the best place to see the difficulty is a skeleton called Turkana Boy. He's one of the most complete ancient humans ever found, a Homo erectus child who died near a lake in Kenya around 1.5 million years ago, with something like 90% of his skeleton preserved. For stature science, that's the jackpot. We can say with real confidence how tall he was the day he died, roughly 160 centimeters already, as a kid somewhere around 8 to 12 years old. And then comes the fight. Because the question everyone actually wants answered isn't how tall he was, it's how tall he would have become. And that you cannot measure because he never got there. You have to project it, and the projection depends entirely on a single assumption. Did Homo erectus grow up the way we do, with a big, late adolescent growth spurt, or did it finish growing earlier? Pick the first assumption, and the original researchers got a strapping adult around 185 centimeters, 6'1". Pick the newer one, and other researchers walked that all the way down to about 163, 5'4". That is a swing of more than 20 centimeters from the very same bones. Not because anyone measured badly, because of one hidden assumption about how a body that no longer exists used to grow. And here's why I'm not telling you this to make you trust the science less. I'm telling you to show you what honest science actually looks like. A door, not a dead end. The disagreement isn't sloppiness. It's the field openly marking the exact line where its knowledge runs out and its assumptions begin. That confident 185, 6 feet tall you'll still see repeated online isn't current consensus, it's the old estimate, frozen in amber. The real answer is, we know how tall the boy was, and we genuinely don't know how tall the man would have been. A science brave enough to say that out loud is one you can trust more, not less. There's one last assumption tangled up in all of this, and it might be the most important to cut loose, because it's the quiet one. The assumption that tall is good and short is failure, that every short population must be a hungry one, every small body a deprived one, shortness, as nature's way of saying something went wrong here. The clearest argument against that comes from living people. The rainforest hunter-gatherer populations of Central Africa often grouped under the term pygmy. For a long time, the lazy explanation for their short stature was simply, not enough food. But look at the genetics and that story falls apart. Short stature in these groups isn't one accident. Researchers found it evolved more than once, independently, with different populations arriving at the same small body through different genes, each carrying the fingerprints of positive natural selection. And that word, selection, changes everything. It means short wasn't what happened to these bodies. Short was the solution. In dense, hot rainforest, a smaller frame can shed heat better, need less food, move more easily through thick growth, maybe reach adulthood, and reproduce faster in a world where life runs short. Their height isn't a deficiency. It's an answer, tuned by evolution to a specific question their environment kept asking. I have to be careful here, and I will be. These are modern Homo sapiens with their own deep history, not stand-ins for Ice Age people, and you cannot point at them and say, this is what some ancient population was. That's not the lesson. The lesson is the principle. Height is not a ladder with primitive at the bottom and advanced at the top. It's a dial, turned up or down by food, by disease, by climate, by selection, by the specific problem a body was built to solve. Short has never meant lesser. Sometimes it's the smartest move a lineage ever made. And one final turn of the roller coaster, the one that brings it right up to you. Track average height across the modern world over the last century, and yes, it's been climbing. Better food, less childhood disease, taller generations. Genuine, measurable progress. But look at what the line is climbing toward. And it's humbling. Many populations only recently clawed their way up to numbers Ice Age hunter-gatherers were already hitting tens of thousands of years ago, and some haven't gotten there yet. We talk about the modern height boom as if we invented being tall. We didn't. In a lot of the world, we spent the 20th century catching back up to a peak our ancestors reached before agriculture, before cities, before writing, and then lost. So let's put the whole roller coaster back together, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. For something like 2 million years, our ancestors hovered in the low 160s, give or take. Steady, unremarkable, going nowhere in particular. Neanderthals lived and died in that band, around your height and built like tanks, nothing like the hunched little brute we slander them as. Then our own species arrived, and the line spiked. Early Homo sapiens, around 177 centimeters, the tallest average in the entire deep record, standing over most of the people who'd ever come after them. And then we invented farming, the so-called dawn of civilization, and the line fell. The first farmers got shorter and sicker, trading variety for calories. And in much of the world it took until the last century or two to climb back to where Ice Age hunters already stood. And running underneath all of it, height was never a measure of how advanced anyone was. It was a measure of how a childhood went. Enough food or not enough, healthy or sick, and of what environment a body had been shaped to solve. Sometimes the answer was tall. Sometimes, brilliantly, it was short. I'll be straight about the edges, like always. Every fossil height in this video is an estimate pulled from bone length, not a tape measure on a living person. We don't know for certain why early sapiens were so tall. We can't agree on what Turkana Boy would have grown into, and we will never know how a single one of these people felt, looking down or up at whoever stood next to them. The bones give us the what, and stay silent on the rest. But here's the mirror to walk away with. The next time you catch yourself reading height as a ranking, taller is better, shorter is lesser, the present as the peak of some long, proud climb. Remember, the graph isn't a ladder. It's a roller coaster, and we're not even riding at the top of it. Your own height is the same kind of record theirs was. A quiet diary of a childhood, and a place, written in bone, signifying nothing about your worth and everything about your story. All of the sources I used in this video are in the description below. The studies, and the ones still arguing with each other, so you can go check the numbers yourself. And remember, to never stop ingesting as much education as you can in this lifetime. Bye.